Hi guys, how are you doing? My name is Sebastian and welcome to our review of the Asus G750J gaming notebook. So here we have the notebook in front of us, and this certainly is a beast of a machine. It's a 17-inch gaming laptop, and here on the lid we can already see the Asus as well as Republic of Gamers branding that we are already accustomed to from Asus, of course. Then here on the back we can see these big exhaust vents. Of course, for the specs, the i7 chip plus the NVIDIA graphics cards that's necessary just to get all the hot air from the components out. Then if we take a look around to the ports of this machine, then we can find here on the right side of the laptop, first off a headphone jack, then a microphone input, two USB 3.0 ports, a Thunderbolt port, which is rarely to see on Windows notebooks these days, an HDMI out, Ethernet, VGA, and then also of course the input for the power. Then if we turn the machine around, on the left side we'll find a Kensington lock, two more USB 3.0 ports, the Blu-ray drive, and also an SD card reader. So when we then open the laptop, we see right here that we actually have an aluminum palm rest, which I think is a very nice contrast also towards this soft touch finish on the outside of the machine. There's no flex, so it's a very solidly built machine, and also the keyboard and the trackpad are just excellent. I have to say I was very impressed, didn't expect that at all. There's barely any flex here on the keyboard, which is a huge plus for me. The typing experience is great, not only for gaming but also just for typing even long articles or documents. That's absolutely no issue at all. They have a really nice feedback to them. And again, I just have to say it's one of the best keyboards that I've ever used, far superior to any ZenBook keyboard or also, for example, the Alienware 14, and just absolutely impressive. We have a nice white backlight as well, so that's nice to see. A separate number pad for those of you who care about such things, and then the trackpad as well is just excellent, and that's really rare on Windows machines, just to be honest, because you rarely find any trackpad that's as good as this one. Fortunately, the G750J has this. First of all, it's very big. Second of all, scrolling and gestures with two fingers work absolutely flawlessly, as you can also see on the screen right there. And I just had no issues at all. And of course it's nice, because this is a gaming notebook, we have these separate buttons right here. So of course for gaming that's far superior to any integrated buttons on the trackpad itself. And again, I can't stress it enough, the keyboard and the mouse pad are absolutely excellent, but actually also Asus has an included mouse in the package as well. So if you don't want to use the trackpad, then you can just use the external mouse. So now if we take a look here at the display, we have a 17-inch display with a full HD resolution. Now, while this sounds good on paper, I have to say I was a little bit disappointed. Now, I wouldn't have really expected to ever be disappointed by a full HD panel, but in this case I am, because at least in 2014 we're already used to having full HD resolution on our smartphones, which arguably is overkill. But then on tablets like the Nexus 7, it's certainly welcome. And if we then go to a 17-inch display, it's a small letdown, because you can definitely see the decreased picture quality, and also of course in regards to text. Now while you're gaming, that isn't really an issue just when you're reading text, but I just wanted to point that out. Also, there's another big issue for me with this laptop display, and that's the fact that it doesn't get bright enough. So right now it's absolutely fine, but you also have to consider that we're indoors, it's completely dark outside. I also just have my indirect lighting from both sides, so that's why we don't see, or why we don't actually have any issues. But a little bit further into the video, we'll actually see that especially in dark scenes, the display just isn't that good and just isn't bright enough at all. So that's my main complaint, especially if you're outdoors. This is certainly a display that I would think is almost unusable. So that's certainly something that you have to consider, even though it sounds great on paper. Now, in terms of performance, this machine is an absolute beast. When we go, for example, here to Geekbench 3 Pro, the 64-bit benchmark, then we'll see that this Intel Core i7 4700 HQ is an absolute beast. We get a multi-core score of 12,118. This also, of course, from the Haswell generation, so that's great to see. Now, usually I would also do a Cinebench benchmark, because Geekbench doesn't really test the graphics card. Now, unfortunately, there's some issues with Windows security warnings, and basically it didn't even let me install Cinebench. and that's why we'll actually use the built-in benchmark here from Sleeping Dogs. So if we go to options and then display, and then go here to extreme advanced options, and then to benchmark mode, then we'll see the results in a minute. And I have to say I was quite impressed by the performance. Now, I've done the benchmark multiple times already, and I have to say that the results might be varying a bit. Now, what I mean by that is that when I did first, basically it got me a minimum frame rate of 20 frames per second, and then the next time it was 10. From my experience actually playing the game, even at such high settings, it was no issue at all. And yes, the frame rate did get a little bit slower, around 20 frames per second, but 9 frames per second wasn't really anything that occurred during gameplay. So I'm not quite sure why the results here of this benchmark vary from time to time that you actually do it. So we'll see about that. But the graphics card that we find in here is an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 880M. And it's a very solid graphics card, also with 3 gigs of video RAM, which is nice to see. And just overall the performance of this machine, also then in combination with the full HD display, even though it's not particularly bright, the amazing keyboard and the nice trackpad is, I think, a great combination if you're looking for a gaming notebook. Of course, you have to be aware of how thick this machine is and how heavy it is and just how big, because of the 7-inch display. But if you're aware of that and if that's okay for you, then I think it's a great purchase. Also other features, for example, like the Blu-ray drive, and then also the fact that you have a 250 gigabyte SSD plus a 1.5 terabyte hard drive on top of that, I think are absolutely fantastic. And this can easily just be your workhorse that replaces the desktop gaming PC. And so I'm very impressed with the machine, no doubt at all. And I think that Asus made a really nice product here. One thing again is just the size, you have to get used to it, and especially if there are other notebooks out there, for example like the Razer Blade, that are so much thinner and basically have similar specs, at least in terms of graphics and CPU, then it might be a tough sell for you. But if you can just overlook that, or if it doesn't really matter to you, then I think the Asus is an amazing purchase that you certainly won't regret. And here we'll also be at the end of the benchmark in a second. There you can also see in these dark scenes that the display just isn't really that bright, and so for me that's certainly an issue that I wish Asus would have addressed and just put a better backlight behind this panel, because the panel itself otherwise is pretty good and I didn't really have any issues with that whatsoever. So gaming performance again was great, also with my games like Just Cause 2 and also of course your Sleeping Dogs. Of course, there are other more demanding games out there, but these are at least not the ones that I'm currently playing. So for me, the machine was absolutely amazing in terms of performance. Here again, we see that we have the 9.8 frames per second. Again, as I mentioned before, I actually had up to 20 frames per second minimum on the same settings, same resolution. So it might be because there's some stuff running in the background, like the Geekbench benchmark and such. But overall, I have to say, also in everyday performance, it's an amazing machine that I can highly recommend. And this will basically also end our review. The battery life is relatively disappointing. You won't really get more than 4, maybe 4.5 hours out of it with average use. If you're actually gaming, the battery can be empty within 2 hours or faster, depending on the games that you're playing. But of course, with a gaming laptop, that's a common issue. And unfortunately, Asus just wasn't really able to solve this issue on this machine. So that's something that you still have to deal with and that you have to be aware of. And so in the end, I can only recommend this Asus gaming notebook. I was very impressed during my testing, and I think it's a fantastic machine, especially again, the trackpad and the keyboard really impressed me. And I just have to say, I can highly recommend it if you're looking for a gaming notebook. I think this is certainly one of the better options out there, and I definitely recommend it. So thanks for watching. Make sure to actually like the video if you enjoyed it. Also subscribe to the channel for many more tech videos. My name is Sebastian, and this is the Asus G750J. Thanks for watching.